She woke up early on Christmas morning and did everything right. The house was clean. The table was set. The food was paid for. But the moment the delivery man arrived, her mother-in-law's smile disappeared. Because in that house, a real wife does not serve takeout on Christmas Day. Christmas morning arrived with sunlight and expectations. The house was already awake before 7 a.m. Voices drifted in from the living room. A generator hummed somewhere outside. The faint smell of fried meat hung in the air. Amina stood alone in the kitchen, tying her apron slowly. She was 29, the newly married wife, still learning the quiet rules of someone else's family. This was her first Christmas as a wife, her first Christmas in her husband's family house, and she wanted it to go well. She wiped the kitchen counter again, even though it was already clean. She straightened the plates and adjusted the table runner. Everything had to be perfect, not because anyone asked, but because she knew how quickly city wife could become an insult. Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. Delivery confirmed. Driver arriving in 15 minutes. She exhaled in relief. Good. She glanced at the list in her head one more time. The house was clean. The drinks were chilled. The chicken was already fried. The rice? Paid for. Neat. Hot. And enough for everyone. She had planned it carefully. Cooking for over 20 people on Christmas morning, alone, in a kitchen that wasn't hers, felt like setting herself up to fail. Ordering food felt practical, respectful, and safe. Besides, she wasn't trying to escape tradition. She had still woken up early, still cleaned, still cooked something. She just didn't want stress. Footsteps approached. Her mother-in-law, Mrs. Bello, appeared at the kitchen doorway. Her wrapper tight, her blouse crisp, her face already set for the day. "You are up early," Mrs. Bello said. "Yes, Ma," Amina replied quickly. "I wanted to prepare." Mrs. Bello scanned the kitchen. The clean surfaces, the covered pots, the neatly arranged plates. She nodded once. "Good," she said. "Christmas is not a lazy day in this family." Amina smiled. "No, Ma." Mrs. Bello lifted a pot lid. Inside the pot was fried chicken. She nodded again. Then she asked casually, "Where is the rice?" Amina hesitated, just slightly. "It will arrive soon, Ma." Mrs. Bello paused. "Arrive?" Her eyes narrowed a fraction. "Arrive from where?" Amina kept her voice light. "I ordered from a very popular restaurant nearby. A very good one. They deliver the meals hot." The silence that followed was small, but heavy. Mrs. Bello replaced the pot lid slowly. "You ordered rice?" "Yes, Ma." Mrs. Bello stared at her. Not angry yet. Just processing. "You didn't cook it?" Amina shook her head politely. "No, Ma." Mrs. Bello didn't speak for a moment. She walked out of the kitchen. Amina watched her go, her stomach tightening slightly. "It's fine," she told herself. "She just needs time to process and understand." In the living room, voices grew louder. Aunties laughed. Someone turned up the TV. David, her husband, passed by the kitchen doorway. "You are doing well," he whispered, smiling. "Don't worry." That helped Amina. A little. Then there was a knock at the gate. It was the delivery man. Amina's heart lifted. She wiped her hands quickly and stepped outside. The smell hit her first. Fresh jollof rice. Steaming hot. And rich. The delivery boxes were stacked neatly. She signed quickly, thanked the rider, and carried the first box inside. That was when she noticed the silence. The living room had gone quiet. Too quiet. Mrs. Bello stood in the center. Her arms folded. Her eyes fixed on the box in Amina's hands. One of the aunties tilted her head. Another whispered something. Mrs. Bello's lips pressed together. "What is that?" she asked. Amina smiled, trying to sound cheerful. "Rice, Ma." Mrs. Bello looked around the room. Then back at Amina. "On Christmas Day?" The way she said it made the words feel heavier. "Yes, Ma," Amina replied gently. "So nobody will be stressed." Mrs. Bello laughed. "Stressed?" she repeated. She turned to the women in the room. "Did you hear that?" A few chuckles followed. "In this house," Mrs. Bello continued slowly, "we cook on Christmas Day." Amina's smile faltered. "I thought." Mrs. Bello raised her hand. "Thought?" she interrupted. She stepped closer. "So you looked at this family and decided takeout was enough?" The room felt smaller. David shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Bellow's voice rose just enough for everyone to hear. You woke up in my house on Christmas morning, and you ordered food? The aunties murmured now. This one is bold. City wives and their ways. Amina felt heat rush to her face. She opened her mouth, closed it. She had meant well, but suddenly it didn't matter. Because in that moment, she realized something important. The food was never the problem. This was about control. And Christmas had just become the battlefield. At first, it was just laughter. Not loud, not cruel, the kind that pretends to be harmless. One of the aunties picked up a spoon and tapped it lightly against a plate. So this is Christmas rice, she said, smiling. Packaged. Another auntie laughed. In my time, she added, we used to start cooking from midnight. Mrs. Bellow didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply sat down. Slowly, like a judge taking her seat. Amina stood there, still holding the box. Her arms were beginning to ache. Put it there, Mrs. Bellow said, pointing to the table. Amina obeyed. As she opened the boxes carefully, the smell filled the room again. Rich and tempting, but no one reached for it. Instead, they watched her. Mrs. Bellow leaned back slightly. So, she said casually, is this how you people do it in the city? Amina hesitated. We just try to make things easier sometimes, Ma. Easier. An auntie repeated, amused. Another voice chimed in. Marriage is not easy. Amina nodded. Yes, Ma. Mrs. Bellow tilted her head. So when things get hard, she asked, will you also order help? A few chuckles followed. Amina forced a small smile. I don't understand, Ma. Mrs. Bellow smiled back. Oh, you will. Someone laughed louder this time. David shifted in his seat. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Mrs. Bellow noticed. She turned to him. David, she said calmly. Did you know about this? David froze. Amina looked at him. He cleared his throat. Yes, Ma, he said carefully. She mentioned it. Mrs. Bellow raised an eyebrow. And you agreed? David shrugged weakly. I didn't think it would be a problem. The room reacted immediately. See, that's how men lose control. Mrs. Bellow sighed. This is why elders must speak. She turned back to Amina. You are newly married, she said. You should be learning. Amina nodded. Yes, Ma. But instead, Mrs. Bellow continued. You are already correcting tradition. I wasn't correcting. Mrs. Bellow raised her hand. Please. Amina stopped. One of the aunties leaned forward. So you didn't think it was important to kneel and cook for your husband's family on Christmas? The question landed hard. Amina swallowed. I cooked some things, she said softly. And I paid for the rest. Another auntie laughed openly now. Paid. She clapped her hands once. So money is now respect? The room filled with laughter. David looked down at the floor. Amina felt the heat crawl up her neck. She glanced around. Faces watching her. Measuring her. Enjoying this. Mrs. Bellow folded her arms. You see, she said, a wife does not just feed mouths. She leaned forward slightly. She feeds pride. Silence followed. Mrs. Bellow's voice dropped. If you cannot cook on Christmas Day, she said, what will you do when life becomes truly difficult? The words pressed into Amina's chest. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. One of the aunties shook her head. These city girls, she said. They want comfort, not marriage. Another added. They don't last. That one hurt. Amina's eyes stung. She blinked hard. She would not cry. Not here. Mrs. Bellow stood up again. Carry the food to the kitchen, she ordered. Amina obeyed. As she turned, someone whispered loudly enough for her to hear. She thinks she's a guest. The words sliced. She reached the kitchen and placed the boxes down carefully. Her hands were shaking now. She leaned against the counter for just a second. Just one. Then she heard footsteps. Mrs. Bellow followed her in. Alone. She closed the door behind her. The kitchen felt smaller. Let me be clear with you, Mrs. Bellow said quietly. No audience. No laughter. Amina straightened. In this family, Mrs. Bellow continued, we do not marry comfort. She stepped closer. We marry sacrifice. She looked Amina in the eye. If you want to stay in this house, she said, you must learn your place. The words settled like dust. Heavy. And final. Amina nodded slowly. Yes, Ma. Mrs. Bellow studied her for a moment longer. Then she turned and walked out. Amina stood there alone. The hum of the generator filled the silence. Her chest felt tight. Her throat burned. And for the first time since she arrived that morning, a thought crept in. Quiet, dangerous, undeniable. If this is only Christmas, what will the rest of my life look like? The kitchen door opened again. Laughter spilled in from the living room. Plates clattered. Someone increased the volume of the TV. Christmas was still pretending to happen. Amina wiped her face quickly and picked up the food trays. She walked back into the living room slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. Mrs. Bello was standing now. She didn't sit anymore. She stood like someone who had made up her mind. "Everyone," she said loudly, clapping her hands once. "Let us settle something." The room quieted. Amina stopped in her tracks. Mrs. Bello turned to her. "You," she said, pointing. "Come." Amina stepped forward. Mrs. Bello raised her voice deliberately. "So that everyone can hear," she said. "Is this how you plan to behave in my son's house?" A murmur rose. "Answer," Mrs. Bello pressed. Amina's heart pounded. "I only wanted to make things easier, Ma." "Easier?" Mrs. Bello laughed sharply. "You came into my house on Christmas Day and chose convenience over tradition." She gestured to the food. "Do you know what people will say?" Amina swallowed. "I didn't mean disrespect." Mrs. Bello scoffed. "Disrespect doesn't need intention." She turned to the room. "If a woman cannot cook on Christmas Day," she announced, "what exactly did we marry her for?" The words hit Amina like a slap. There was gasps and whispers. Someone laughed nervously. Amina stood frozen. Her chest burned. Mrs. Bello looked back at her. "Tell us," she demanded. "Why didn't you cook?" Amina's voice came out small. "I was trying to avoid stress." Mrs. Bello raised her hands. "Stress?" She laughed again louder. "So marriage is stress to you?" "No, Ma." Mrs. Bello cut her off. "You think because you work in the city, you can rewrite marriage?" The room buzzed now. Amina looked around. Different faces watching her, judging her, and enjoying it. She turned slowly to David. He was sitting down, his eyes down, and silent. "David," Mrs. Bello said suddenly. "Stand up." He did. Slowly. She pointed at Amina. "Is this what you married?" David hesitated. The pause was short, but it was everything. "I didn't think it would become this big," he said weakly. Amina stared at him. That was it. No defense. No explanation. No, leave her alone. Mrs. Bello nodded, as if satisfied. "You see," she said to the room. "Even her husband knows this is wrong." Something inside Amina cracked. Not loudly. Quietly. Painfully. She had defended him all morning. Smiled for him. Endured for him. And he couldn't even speak up for her. Mrs. Bello continued. "A wife who brings embarrassment must be corrected early." She stepped closer to Amina. "Go inside and change," she ordered. "After that, start cooking properly. Guests are still coming." Amina stared at her. "Cooking? After everything?" She turned back to David one last time. He avoided her eyes. That was when she understood. This wasn't about rice. It wasn't about Christmas. It wasn't even about Mrs. Bello. It was about the man who would never choose her when it mattered. Amina took a deep breath. The room waited. She simply said, "No." The word landed softly, but it shook the room. Mrs. Bello blinked. "What did you say?" Amina lifted her head. "I said no." Gasps filled the space. Mrs. Bello laughed in disbelief. "You will cook." Amina shook her head. "No, Ma, I will not." The room erupted. "Ah, did you hear her? This one is sharp mouth." Mrs. Bello's face darkened. "So you want to disgrace us?" Amina's voice remained calm. "I was already disgraced." Silence fell. She continued. "I cleaned this house. I prepared food. I paid for food. And still, I am called lazy." She looked around. "I am not your maid." Then she turned to David. "I am your wife." David opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was answer enough. Amina reached for her handbag. Mrs. Bello shouted, "You will not walk out of my house like this." Amina met her gaze. "This is not your house," she said quietly. "It is my marriage." She paused. "And I refuse to live in a marriage where silence is louder than love." The room was dead quiet. She walked to the door. No one stopped her. Not Mrs. Bello, her mother-in-law. Not the aunties. Not David, her husband. She stepped outside. The harmattan air hit her face. It was cool and clean. She inhaled deeply. Then she walked away. Christmas ended early. The takeout food was left untouched. The guests were awkward. Their laughter was gone. Mrs. Bello sat silently that evening. David didn't eat. A few weeks passed. The marriage didn't survive the silence. Amina returned to the city. To peace. To dignity. To herself. She served takeout on Christmas Day. They said she failed as a wife. But what they never understood was this. A woman who refuses humiliation is not lazy, not proud, not disrespectful. She is simply done begging for acceptance. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, share and subscribe to our channel for more.